A shard of light from the dashboard clock cut through the darkness. 3:17 in the morning. Eleanor Vance watched the needle on the temperature gauge climb into the red. It was a slow, inevitable ascent, like a stock price, just before a crash. She knew the mechanics of failure. She had built a career on predicting it, leveraging it, and profiting from it. This, however, was just an inconvenience. The engine sputtered, a final metallic cough that echoed in the profound silence of the surrounding forest. The car, a machine of German precision and six-figure comfort, coasted to a halt on the gravel shoulder of a road that was little more than a rumor on her GPS. Steam hissed from under the hood. She sat for a moment, encased in leather and silence. The world outside the hermetically sealed windows was absolute. No streetlights, no ambient city glow, just the stark silver light of a winter moon on bare trees. Her phone had no signal. Of course it didn't. This was the part of the country that maps forgot a place, where transactions were measured in seasons, not quarters. She was here to change that. Sterling Global, her father's company, her company now saw potential. It saw undervalued assets waiting for conversion. She was here to close the deal on a parcel of land designated Thorn property. The final holdout. Eleanor stepped out of the car. The cold was a physical shock. Sharp and clean and utterly indifferent. It bit at her cheeks and stole the breath from her lungs. She wore a tailored wool coat, expensive but useless against this kind of elemental cold. It was city armor, not a real defense. A light flickered in the distance through the skeletal trees. A single yellow square against the black. Hope, or at least a solution. She started walking. The crunch of her heels on the frozen gravel was the only sound. It felt alien, intrusive. Each step was a negotiation with the unfamiliar terrain. Problems, she thought, were simply a series of steps toward a resolution. This was just another problem. Find the light. Secure a phone. Call a service. Get back to the business of acquisition. The light came from a farmhouse. It was old, built of stone and wood that had settled into the landscape. A plume of smoke curled from a stone chimney. A slow gray signal against the stars. A beat-up truck, its paint faded to a memory of blue, was parked near a large barn. She approached the house, her footsteps slowing. There was a hesitation in her stride she did not recognize. In her world, you did not approach. You summoned. Through a large front window she saw a man. He was tall and broad-shouldered. His back to her as he leaned over a long wooden table. He moved with a quiet economy of motion, his hands tracing the grain of a piece of wood. Beside him, a small child, a girl with hair the color of straw, sat bundled in a blanket, watching him. Eleanor raised her hand to knock, then stopped. The man straightened up and turned, not toward the window, but toward the girl. He said something she couldn't hear. The girl shivered, pulling the blanket tighter. Without a word, the man took off the heavy flannel-lined jacket he was wearing. He knelt and wrapped it around the child over her blanket. He was left in just a thin thermal shirt. He smoothed her hair, his large calloused hand gentle against her small head. The child snuggled into the jacket, its sleeves ridiculously long on her. She looked up at him and smiled. Eleanor's hand fell to her side. She had witnessed a transaction, a gift, selfless and immediate. There was no negotiation, no calculation of cost or benefit. It was a pure, unthinking transfer of warmth. It was a language she understood intellectually, but had not spoken in a very long time. It made her feel colder than the air. She finally knocked. The sound was loud in the quiet night. The man turned toward the door. His face was lean, his features stark in the warm light from the house. He wasn't surprised. He seemed to be expecting something, just not necessarily her. He opened the door. The warmth from inside washed over her, smelling of wood smoke and coffee. "My car broke down about a half-mile back," she stated. It was a fact, not a request. I need to use a phone." He looked past her, at the darkness from which she had emerged. He nodded slowly, his eyes assessing her. The expensive coat, the impractical shoes, the air of authority that clung to her like a second skin. He stepped aside to let her in. The inside of the house was simple, clean. The walls were lined with books. The furniture was handmade, solid, built to last for generations. Everything had a purpose. There was no decoration for decoration's sake. "The phone's on the wall," he said, his voice a low rumble. The child Lily peeked at her from behind his legs. Eleanor made the call. A tow truck would be there in the morning. Not until morning. She ended the call and turned back to him. The problem was not yet solved. It was merely postponed. "I'll pay you for your trouble," she said, reaching for her purse. It was her native tongue. "Compensation." He shook his head once. "Not necessary." He gestured to an old armchair by the fire. "You can wait here. It's warm." She hesitated. Accepting help without payment felt like incurring a debt, and she hated being in debt. But the cold had seeped into her bones. She sat. The chair was worn, comfortable, shaped by years of use. He brought her a mug of something hot. It wasn't coffee. It was tea, dark and fragrant with herbs she couldn't name. He went back to his work at the table, sanding the piece of wood with long, steady strokes. The sound was rhythmic, calming. The girl Lily eventually crept out from behind him and sat on the floor, a small sketch pad in her lap. She began to draw. Eleanor watched the man work. His hands were scarred, competent. They knew the wood. He was not rushing. "Land doesn't rush," her father used to say. She had always considered it a quaint, useless aphorism. Now watching this man, she felt a glimmer of its meaning. "You're Caleb Thorne," she said. It wasn't a question. She had studied the file. He didn't stop sanding. He just nodded. "And you're Eleanor Vance." Her surprise must have shown on her face. "Your picture is in the prospectus they sent," he explained, his eyes still on his work. "The one explaining why my family's land is a prime asset for commercial development." There was no anger in his voice, just a flat statement of fact. It was more disarming than any accusation. She had come here to acquire his land, to dismantle his world for the sake of a quarterly report. And here she was, accepting his warmth, his tea, the shelter of his home. The irony was not lost on her. It felt sharp, like a shard of glass. The little girl got up and walked over to her. She held out her sketch pad. On the page was a drawing, a tall man, a small girl, and a stick figure with sharp shoulders and a rectangular purse, all standing under a smiling moon. "For you," Lily whispered. Eleanor took the drawing. The paper was warm from the child's hands. It was the second selfless gift she had received that night. "Thank you," she said. The words felt strange in her mouth. Unpracticed. Caleb finally stopped his work. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. His eyes were a startlingly clear gray. "You should get some rest," he said, gesturing to a couch. "Morning will be here soon enough." He didn't ask what she was doing on this road in the middle of the night. He didn't ask about the deal. He treated her like a traveler, not an adversary. As she settled onto the couch, pulling an old quilt over herself, she saw him pick up the piece of wood he had been sanding. It was a small, intricately carved bird, a gift, no doubt, for his daughter. He held it up to the light, checking its lines, its balance. He was a builder, a creator. She was a liquidator. The thought did not rest easy as she drifted into an exhausted sleep, the scent of wood smoke in the air. Morning came with a pale watery light that filtered through the clean windows. The tow truck arrived, a lumbering beast of a machine that seemed out of place in the quiet landscape. The driver, a man named Gus, knew Caleb. Of course he did. Everyone here seemed to know everyone. They spoke in a shorthand of shared history, their conversation easy and unforced. Eleanor stood apart, an observer. She felt like a tourist in a country where she did not speak the language. "Your car's going to need a new radiator," Gus told her. "Have to order the part. Take a day. Maybe two. 2 days." The timeline for her deal was precise, aggressive. A 2-day delay was a significant problem. It meant staying here. "Near him, there's a motel in town," Gus offered. "Clean enough, or you could rent the old Hayes cottage," Caleb said, speaking to Gus but looking at her. "It's empty." "Closer." The word hung in the air. She agreed to the cottage. It was a tactical decision. Proximity to the asset was key in any negotiation. She was treating this like a negotiation. She told herself that was all it was. The cottage was small, neat, and smelled of lavender and old books. Samuel Hayes, the owner, was an elderly man with kind eyes and a handshake as firm as oak. He gave her a key and told her to make herself at home. She spent the day on the phone with her office, her voice crisp and authoritative as she rearranged schedules, delegated tasks, and managed the fallout from her delay. Her assistant, Ava Chen, was efficient, loyal, a voice of calm in the chaos. "Have you met the landowner yet?" Ava asked. "Yes," Eleanor replied, looking out the cottage window toward Caleb's farm. "I've met him. Is he going to be a problem?" Eleanor watched as Caleb lifted Lily onto a fence rail, pointing at something in the sky. The girl laughed, a bright, clear sound that carried on the wind. "I don't know," Eleanor said, and it was the most honest thing she had said all day. Later that afternoon, she found a file on her tablet that Ava had sent. It was a background report on Caleb Thorne. She opened it, her curiosity overriding her professional detachment. The man was not just a carpenter. He was a ghost. Caleb Thorne, former lead systems architect for a major tech competitor. A prodigy in data security and encryption. He had held patents that were still industry standards. He had testified before congressional committees. He had been a keynote speaker at global tech summits. Then, 5 years ago, he had vanished. His wife, Lila Thorne, an investigative journalist, had died in a single-car accident. 2 weeks later, Caleb resigned from his high-powered job, sold his city home, and disappeared with his young daughter. He had cashed out, liquidated his life, and moved here to his wife's ancestral home. He had walked away from millions. From a world she had spent her entire life fighting to dominate. Her initial assessment of him, a simple rural craftsman, crumbled into dust. This man was not simple. He was a fortress. He had built these quiet walls around himself for a reason, and she was here to tear them down. The thought made her stomach clench. She walked over to his farm that evening, the prospectus for the development in her briefcase. It was time to be direct, to lay out the terms, to do her job. She found him in the barn, repairing a piece of old machinery. The air was thick with the smell of oil and metal. "We need to talk about the offer," she began, her voice echoing slightly in the large space. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at her. He wasn't surprised. He had been waiting for this. "The offer is generous," she continued, pulling out the folder. "It's well above market value. It would set you and your daughter up for life." He didn't look at the folder. His gaze was fixed on her. "My daughter is already set up for life," he said. "She has this." He gestured around him, at the barn, the fields beyond the darkening sky. "This is just land, Mr. Thorne. It's an asset. It can be converted." "It's not an asset," he corrected her gently. "It's a trust. My wife's family put it in a conservation trust almost a century ago. It can't be developed. Not ever." Eleanor felt a jolt. A conservation trust? That wasn't in her files. Her legal team was the best. They would not have missed something so fundamental. "That can't be right," she said. "Our due diligence was thorough." "Was it?" he asked. He walked over to an old wooden chest in the corner of the barn. He lifted the heavy lid and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. He opened it on a workbench. The trust was established in 1928, he said, running his finger down a page of elegant, spidery script. It was co-signed by two parties, the Thorne family and a junior partner from a visiting law firm, a young man who believed in protecting wild places. He turned the ledger toward her. She saw the signature at the bottom of the page. It was a name she knew as well as her own. Robert Vance, her father. The air left her lungs. Her father, the architect of Sterling Global's aggressive expansion, had helped create the very legal barrier that now stood in her way. "This changes things," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It doesn't change anything," Caleb replied. "It just is." He closed the ledger. The sound echoed like a door shutting. That night, a call came through to her satellite phone. It was Marcus. His voice was smooth, polished, the sound of corporate power. Marcus Thorne, Caleb's estranged brother, the head of acquisitions at Sterling Global, the man driving this deal. "Eleanor," he said, his tone impatient. "Any progress? We're on a timetable here." "There's a complication," she said, choosing her words carefully. "A conservation. Trust, silence. On the other end of the line." Then a short, sharp laugh. "A historical footnote," Marcus said dismissively. "Our legal team will find a loophole. They always do. Your job is to handle the landowner. Persuade him. Everyone has a price. Especially my brother." She thought of Caleb wrapping his jacket around his daughter. She thought of the carved bird. "I'm not sure he does," she said. "Then make him understand the cost of refusal," Marcus said, his voice hardening. "This project is vital. Don't let some sentimental fools stand in the way of progress. The board is watching." The call ended. Progress. She looked out at the silent, moonlit fields. It looked a lot like peace. The next morning, it wasn't a physical threat. It was colder, more precise. A man in a suit arrived and served Caleb with a legal notice. A boundary dispute. A claim filed by an anonymous corporation alleging that Caleb's fence line encroached on their newly acquired neighboring property. It was a classic tactic. Bleed a landowner dry with legal fees until they have no choice but to sell. It was a move from Marcus's playbook. It was a move she herself had authorized in the past. Caleb read the document, his face impassive. He folded it neatly and put it in his pocket. Eleanor watched him, a knot of something ugly and familiar tightening in her chest. This was her world, her methods, being used against this quiet man. "This is wrong," she said, the words surprising her as much as they did him. He looked at her, his gray eyes searching her face. He gave a small, weary nod. "I need to see the trust documents," she said. "The originals. I need to understand what my father did." He hesitated for a long moment. Then he led her back to the house. The documents were in a safe deposit box in town. They went together in his old truck. The ride was silent. She was acutely aware of the space between them on the bench seat. It felt charged, a space filled with unspoken history, with the ghosts of her father and his wife. At the small-town bank, the manager greeted Caleb by name. He retrieved the box. Inside, beneath yellowed property deeds and family records, was a thick envelope with her father's law firm insignia on it. Caleb slid it across the table to her. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was the original trust agreement. But there was something else too. A handwritten letter, tucked into the folds of the legal paper. The letter was from her father. It was addressed to Lila Thorne. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She read the letter. Her father wrote of his deep regret over the direction Sterling Global had taken after his retirement. He wrote of Marcus Thorne's reckless ambition, of corners being cut, of a corporate culture that valued profit above all else. He had learned of Lila's investigation into a Sterling subsidiary, a chemical plant Marcus was managing. He feared she was in danger. He was trying to gather evidence from inside the company to help her, to protect her. The last line was a chilling premonition. Be careful, Lila. There are men who would rather bury a truth than face it. I fear Marcus is one of them. The letter was dated the day before Lila's accident. Eleanor looked up from the page, her vision blurred. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was about a cover-up. It was about a death. It was about her own father's legacy and the man who had corrupted it. She looked at Caleb. His face was a mask of controlled grief. He knew what was in the letter. He had lived with this knowledge for 5 years. My father sent this to her, Eleanor said, her voice thick. She received it the morning she died, Caleb said quietly. She called me. She told me she had enough. She was going to meet a source that night, a whistleblower from the plant. She never made it. The silence in the small room was vast, heavy with the weight of 5 lost years. Eleanor's corporate world, with its clean lines of profit and loss, suddenly seemed like a fantasy. The real world was here, in this small room, with this broken man and a dead woman's name hanging in the air. This was a debt, and it had finally come due. She made a decision. It was not a calculated business move. It was a shift deep in her core, a recalibration of her entire being. I'm going to help you, she said. Caleb watched her, his expression unreadable. He had no reason to trust her. She was a Vance. She was Sterling Global. Why? He asked. Because my name is on that company, she said, her hand closing around the letter hard enough to crease it. And my father's name is on this trust. It was a declaration of allegiance. She was choosing a side. They left the bank and drove back to the farm. The world looked different. The trees seemed sharper. The sky a deeper blue. She was seeing it not as an asset to be liquidated, but as something to be defended. She called Ava. She didn't give her the details. Not yet. She just gave her a task. I need you to find everything you can on a subsidiary called Northwood Chemicals, she said. Everything. Environmental audits, safety reports, personnel files, especially anything related to a project 5 years ago, and I need you to be discreet. This is off the books. Ava was silent for a moment, then, simply, understood. Eleanor knew she was placing her career, and Ava's, at immense risk. But the calculus had changed. The risk of doing nothing felt infinitely greater. That evening the threat escalated. A car she didn't recognize idled at the end of Caleb's long driveway for almost an hour before driving off. It was a message. We are watching you. It was no longer safe for her at the cottage. You should stay here, Caleb said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. She moved her things into the small guest room in his house. The forced proximity was no longer a tactic. It was a necessity. A circle of wagons against a coming storm. Living under his roof, she began to see the rhythm of his life, the early mornings in the barn, the patient way he helped Lily with her schoolwork, the quiet evenings spent reading by the fire. It was a life of purpose, of deliberate choices, a life built, not acquired. She found herself falling into its rhythm. She started making coffee in the morning. She helped clear the table after meals. Small, domestic acts that felt more real than any boardroom victory. One afternoon she found him staring at an old, framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was a smiling woman with bright, intelligent eyes. Lila. She was a force of nature, he said, his voice soft. She believed you could fix the world if you just showed people the truth. Most people only see what's flowering. They miss what's moving underneath. He was talking about his wife, but he could have been talking about himself. Ava called back 2 days later. Her voice was tense. I found something, she said. Or rather, I found a lack of something. The safety reports from the Northwood plant for that entire year are gone. Wiped from the servers. The original hard copies were reported destroyed in a minor electrical fire. There's no trace of them. A perfect cover-up. But, Ava continued, I cross-referenced the plant's personnel files. One name kept flagging. One Trufferand, a senior safety inspector. He filed multiple internal complaints that year. Then he took an early retirement, very sudden, with a very generous severance package. He moved away. He was the whistleblower, Eleanor breathed. He was Lila's source. I think so, Ava said. His name is David Miller. I have a last known address. The address was 3 states away. Eleanor knew what she had to do. She couldn't go herself. Marcus would be tracking her movements. But Caleb could. He was a ghost. He could move without being seen. She laid it all out for him. The missing files. The retired inspector. The chance, however slim, that he might still be willing to talk. Caleb listened, his face grim. Leaving his daughter, leaving his land, was a risk. But staying, doing nothing, was no longer an option. I'll go, he said. While he was gone, Eleanor immersed herself in the history of the farm. She found Lila's old office in a small room at the back of the house. It was just as she had left it. Research papers were stacked neatly on the desk. Maps with highlighted areas were pinned to a corkboard. It was the office of a woman who was hunting for a truth. Eleanor felt a kinship with her, a strange connection across time. She started going through the files, trying to piece together the investigation Lila had been building. Lily would often come and sit with her, drawing quietly. One day, she pointed to a box in the corner, tucked under the desk. "Mommy's special box," she said. Eleanor opened it. It was filled with personal items. Old notebooks, photographs, and at the very bottom, a small digital audio recorder. Her heart hammered in her chest. She pressed the play button. The recording was distorted, staticky. It was a phone call. Lila's voice, clear and determined. And another voice, a man's nervous and hurried. "I can't meet you at the plant," the man was saying. "It's not safe. They're watching me." "Where then?" Lila asked. "The old bridge on County Road 9, the man said. "Midnight. I'll have the copies of the original reports, the ones they ordered us to destroy." The recording ended. County Road 9. That was where the accident happened. Lila had been on her way to meet the whistleblower. The official report said she lost control on an icy patch, but this was proof. She was targeted. A few days later, Caleb returned. He looked tired, but his eyes held a new light. A flicker of hope. He found David Miller. The man was living a quiet life, haunted by his silence. At first he refused to talk. He was afraid. But Caleb didn't pressure him. He just told him about Lila, about her courage, about the daughter she left behind. The man finally broke. He had kept copies of everything. The suppressed safety audits, the internal memos from Marcus ordering the falsification of data, the evidence of a toxic chemical leak that the company had covered up, a leak that had contaminated the local water supply. He had lived with the guild for 5 years. He gave Caleb a USB drive containing it all. The smoking gun. Now. They had the truth. But the truth was not enough. In her world, truth was a commodity. It could be bought, sold, or buried. They needed to present it in a way that could not be dismissed. This was her battlefield, the boardroom. Eleanor went to work. She was no longer just the CEO of Sterling Global. She was a strategist, an architect of a different kind of structure, one built on justice, not profit. She used her knowledge of corporate bylaws, of shareholder agreements, of the delicate balance of power on the board. She called her allies, planting seeds of doubt about Marcus's leadership, about the financial liabilities of the Northwood division. She worked from Caleb's kitchen table, the scent of his daughter's crayons mixing with the high-stakes tension of her phone calls. He would watch her, a silent partner in this strange alliance. He would bring her food when she forgot to eat. He would repair the loose hinge on her laptop. Small acts of care that grounded her, that kept her focused. They found a quiet supporter in Samuel Hayes, the wise elder who owned the cottage. He had been a friend of Lila's family for decades. He held a crucial piece of the puzzle. A sworn affidavit from a local doctor now deceased, detailing a spike in rare illnesses in the area around the Northwood plant 5 years ago. The doctor had suspected a link, but was threatened into silence. Samuel had kept the document safe, waiting for the right moment. With the whistleblower's data, the doctor's affidavit, and her father's letter, the case was ironclad. Eleanor scheduled an emergency board meeting. The official reason was a review of the Thorne property acquisition. The real reason was a corporate coup. The day of the meeting, she flew back to the city. Caleb came with her. He wore a simple dark suit that he must have kept from his old life. He looked out of place and yet completely solid. An anchor of quiet integrity in her world of glass and steel. They walked into the boardroom together. The long polished table reflected the faces of the most powerful people in her company. Marcus was at the head of the table, smiling, confident. He thought this was his victory lap. He looked at Caleb with a flicker of contemptuous surprise, then dismissed him. A relic from a life he had left behind. Eleanor took her seat. She felt a profound calm. She was not here to fight for market share or quarterly earnings. She was here to settle a debt. She began to speak. Her voice was low, steady, devoid of emotion. She didn't present accusations. She presented data. She laid out the financial inconsistencies of the Northwood division, the unexplained expenses, the severance packages that looked like hush money. Then she moved to the environmental reports. She put the whistleblower's original damning audits on the main screen, next to the falsified versions Marcus had submitted. The discrepancy was stark, undeniable. A murmur went through the room. Marcus's smile faltered. Marcus's smile faltered. He tried to interrupt, to dismiss it as a clerical error, a disgruntled employee. But Eleanor was relentless. She presented the doctor's affidavit, the spike in cancer rates, the contaminated water tables. Prant. Finally she read from her father's letter. His words filled the silent room. A voice from the grave, a testament to the company's lost principles. She concluded with a simple statement. This project, the Thorne acquisition, was not about expansion. It was about silence. It was a final desperate attempt by Marcus to gain control of the land surrounding the contaminated area, to bury the evidence of his crimes forever. And then she played the audio recording. Lila's voice, clear and brave, echoed in the sterile boardroom. The voice of the woman Marcus had silenced. The truth, once revealed, was devastating. Marcus' power, built on a foundation of lies, crumbled in minutes. His allies on the board stared at their hands. His blustering denials sounded hollow, pathetic. The vote was unanimous. He was removed from his position, effective immediately. Security was called to escort him from the building. As he was led away, his eyes met Caleb's across the room. There was no triumph in Caleb's expression. Only a profound, weary sadness for the brother he had lost long ago. The meeting was over. The battle was won. Eleanor stood by the vast window, looking down at the city below. It was her city, her kingdom. But it felt different now. Smaller. Caleb came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They had done it. Together, in the weeks that followed, the consequences cascaded. The authorities launched a full investigation into Northwood Chemicals. Marcus was indicted. Sterling Global, under Eleanor's new leadership, cooperated fully. She announced the permanent cancellation of the Thorne property development. In its place, she established the Lila Thorne Foundation, an independent entity funded by a massive endowment from Sterling Global. Its mission was to fund environmental journalism and provide legal support for whistleblowers. It was a public act of atonement, but for Eleanor it was a private promise kept. She systematically dismantled the parts of the company her father had grown to regret. She restructured, focusing on sustainable ethical growth. She lost some shareholders. She fired executives who had thrived under the old regime. She made enemies. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was building something, not just acquiring it. 3 months later, she walked out of the Sterling Global Tower for the last time. As CEO, she had appointed a successor, a woman who shared her new vision. Eleanor would remain as chair of the board and head of the foundation, but she was stepping away from the daily battle. She had sold her penthouse apartment, with its sterile white walls and panoramic views of a world she no longer wanted to conquer. She had liquidated her old life. She got into a simple, functional truck, not the German sedan, which she had sold for scrap. She drove for hours, leaving the city in a rear-view mirror until it was just a smudge on the horizon. She drove until the roads narrowed, until the trees grew thick and the sky opened up, vast and clean. She pulled up the long gravel driveway to Caleb's farm. He was on the porch, fixing a loose floorboard. He looked up as she approached, a hammer in his hand. He wasn't surprised. It was as if he had been waiting. She got out of the truck. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. It smelled like home. A screen door creaked open, and Lily ran out, a piece of paper clutched in her hand. She threw her small arms around Eleanor's legs in a fierce hug. "I made you a new one," she said, holding up the drawing. This time there were 3 figures standing in front of the farmhouse. A tall man, a small girl, and a woman with a real smile, not just a line. And this time they were all holding hands. She knelt and hugged the child back. "Thank you, Lily. It's beautiful." She stood up and walked onto the porch. Caleb had gone back to his work, tapping a nail into place with precise, efficient strokes. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask why she was here. He simply straightened up, picked up a piece of sandpaper from his toolbox, and handed it to her. She took it. Her fingers brushed against his. The touch was brief, accidental, but it sent a current of warmth through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. She knelt on the other side of the floorboard and began to sand the rough edges, her movements mirroring his. They worked in a comfortable, easy silence, the scrape of sandpaper on wood. The only sound, they were repairing something. Building something new. Together. Some fences mark where a world ends. Others mark where it truly begins.